Hello everyone, and welcome back to Chosun Yeonghwa Review, aka North Korean Movie Reviews, where we have another in-depth analysis of film made in the Hermit Kingdom. This time around, we're ditching the light-hearted stuff, and instead are diving in head-first into what everyone wants, a fucking war film. Myeongryong Sumur Irgopol, known in English as Order Number 27. This movie was directed by Jung Ki-mo and released in 1986 in North Korea. The movie begins with a squad of North Korean Special Operations Force soldiers, ironically armed to the teeth with captured American weapons like the M1 carbine and M3 submachine gun, sitting around the forest after completing their training exercise. One of the soldiers named Young-gun complains that all they do is train while the other teams have already been dispatched to the front, and eagerly asks when they too will be sent into the fight. Their captain, Chol U, assures them that something will come along soon. Suddenly, one of the protagonists, Kilnam, bursts from his hiding spot and startles the other soldiers. He tells the captain that their duty officer wishes to speak to him, and sets out while the rest eat lunch. The captain is told of a force from the South Korean Special Warfare Command that is deployed behind enemy lines to the rear. He's instructed to rendezvous with a North Korean agent codenamed Balaustein, and then find said force and destroy it within 3 days. Eager to finally get his men out into the action, the captain happily accepts and informs his team that they're leaving later that night. The group sets out by truck just before crossing a river into South Korean territory on foot. They say their goodbyes to their commander and head out into the icy river. They cross successfully and pass by what appears to be a destroyed American infantry fighting vehicle, which ironically enough resembles a Soviet BTR-60 rather than, say, an M113, the American contemporary. The scene jumps to the following morning where the team, now dressed as South Korean soldiers, have infiltrated a civilian locomotive headed towards Yongchon Station, where they're slated to meet their role, Balaustein. Despite their strict orders to keep a low profile, Kilnam loses his cool when he observes a Republic of Korea soldier strangling a little girl. A fight breaks out between the North Koreans and the South Korean Dragon Corps. The captain diffuses the situation before it escalates further, and secretly orders the detachment of North Koreans to jump out of the train as their cover was blown. The captain is then greeted by a mysterious man wearing sunglasses and a black coat, who is later revealed as Chang Yon-dar, a major and head drill master of the U.S. Corps. The captain explains that he is a field surgeon who is escorting wounded soldiers away from the front lines. When Young-dar asks where the wounded soldiers are, he explains that he moved them into the next compartment to avoid further escalation. Young-dar ventures to said compartment and finds all the soldiers there completely unharmed. Now suspicious, he orders the train stations to shut down and search for them. By this point, however, the North Koreans are long gone and making their way through the forest to the rendezvous point on foot. In the next scene is where we finally get to see our mole, Balaustein, as she waits for the men to arrive. She's greeted by Young-dar, who knows her as Young-mi. Young-dar explains that he saw some strange soldiers on the train that since disappeared. The ensuing friendly conversation about the situation on the train alerts Young-mi that they are no longer on the train, so she will have to wait for another chance the next day at the train cafe. A suspenseful scene ensues as the captain and his South Korean counterpart explain to their respective subordinates about the situation. The captain and his team must travel 12 kilometers, that's 7.4 miles for you fellow moonlanders out there, per hour in order to meet the deadline for the second meeting. The South Koreans are in hot pursuit, however, and have laid a trap with orders to catch them alive. Following a chase through the forest and a cliff-climbing scene aided by Super Mario, they come across a Buddhist temple occupied by South Korean soldiers. When a scout for the ROK observes the group, the captain orders Bongnam to dispatch him. Rather than simply shooting him like any other soldier would do and be done with it, he engages him with his taekwondo instead and ends up killing him with a hatchet. He dispatches one more soldier with a knife before finally the rest of the South Korean detachment is alerted. Once again, however, despite the fact that their cover is already blown, they don't use their guns, and instead blow even more time they don't have by dispatching them one by one with Taekwondo. After a few sped-up camera sequences, Super Mario jumps, and, well, this, they're back on track. As the group splits into two, one half ambushes the South Korean patrol, while UJ offers to stay behind and distract practically an entire infantry division of South Korean soldiers while the rest head out to the second rally point. UJ is later mortally wounded by a Charlie horse and gives an emotional monologue while staring at a backdrop before taking down several more soldiers with Taekwondo. Later that night, the main group sends a sit rep back to command. Kilnam apologizes for blowing their cover on the train and blame. The captain tries to comfort Kilnam by saying that sacrifice isn't something to fear. Rather, you should fear hesitation. He tells Kilnam not to blame himself. While this is happening, the second group from before, led by Chung Yun, regroups with them. The next morning, security at the train station increases dramatically as news of the North Korean team is spread. Despite this, our red heroes manage to sneak in anyways dressed as casual folk. They spot Chung Young-dar, who makes his way to his table along with a South Korean soldier Kilnam fought with on the train. They also spot Young-mi, who has come in right at 12 p.m. Unbeknownst to the Reds, however, the South Koreans know they've come and have set a trap. Luckily, the captain and his team are already one step ahead of them and manage to take Young-mi to safety while at the same time escape the trap by beating everyone to death with their Taekwondo and silverware throwing skills, which magically teleport from one body part to the next. As the Reds escape, we finally get to see them use their guns in what is the most hilarious display of firearms techniques in all of film history. The group hijacks a Willys Jeep and mow down scores of South Korean troops with only their 1911s and one grease gun, and take absolutely no hits whatsoever despite having no cover. The team ditches the Willys Jeep by ramming it into another one and hijack a moving train. While on the train, one of the soldiers tells the captain that they still failed to contact Young-mi, but that Holbom, a fellow soldier, is taking her to the third rally point. As the train passes under a bridge, scores of South Korean troops drop from above on the train. Kilnam volunteers to dispatch them himself and mows them down despite again having no cover and being outnumbered 15-1. Just before he's finally about to meet his maker, however, the captain and Seryong from a broad bellflower emerge with grease guns to kill South Korean soldiers. Meanwhile, Kilnam separates the train carts, allowing the team to escape, but is killed tragically as he attempts to rejoin his team. Later on in the afternoon, the remainder of the group plus Young-mi have a moment of silence for Kilnam. As they each individually mourn for his loss, the captain reminds the group by telling them not to let Kilnam die in vain, and that the mission must go on. Soon after Young-mi tells the captain about the South Korean headquarters, she's ordered by command to head back to North Korea. She replies that she doesn't want to go back alone. The captain, who calls her by her real name, Eunha, shares a conversation about what their life was like before the war. Eunha explains that when she is under stress, all she thinks about is how happy her life was back home, and how she wants to become a teacher when the war is over.
그때는 얼마나 할 얘기가 많겠습니까? 난 그들에게 안겨진 행복이 어떻게 마련되었는가를 꼭 이야기하겠습니다.
Meanwhile, back at the South Korean headquarters, Chung Young-dar asks where Young-mi went. When his secretary replies that she's at the hairdresser's, he begins to realize that every time the North Koreans appear, Young-mi is always present. He suddenly suspects Young-mi is a spy and sets out to find her. Back at the North Korean camp, their radio observer Chol U reports back that a helicopter has landed at the South Korean base. Eun-ha explains that they only use helicopters when they are transferring to another base. Against the wishes of the captain, she volunteers to go back into the base and find out herself. Upon returning to the base, the Special Forces commander and others ironically board another Russian helicopter, this time an Mi-4 Hound. As Eun-ha speculates where they are going, she's confronted by Young-dar and two others. Young-dar confronts her about her espionage and stupidly informs her about their plan to relocate to Tongseom Bay before attempting to arrest her. She attacks Young-dar and dispatches him along with two others with her taekwondo and adept silverware throwing skills. Her escape attempt is nearly cut short, however, when Young-dar fires his 1911, striking her in the back. She manages to limp away from the compound looking like she's fresh out of a frat party when she's rescued by the captain and his men. It's also just now occurring to me that this is the same actress who played Sung-hwa in Broad Bellflower. She's kinda hot, honestly. As she lies dying in the captain's arms, she relays the whereabouts of their new location at Tongseom Bay before being carried off by Yujae back to friendly territory. As the night approaches, the captain and his team overlook the enemy camp at Tongseom Bay. He gives his men a rallying speech about people like Kilnam sacrificing everything for this moment. He informs the group that this is a suicide mission and to devote everything they have to see that it succeeds. He orders the team to split into three groups. Army Group A will attack the general staff, B will secure the airport, while C will secure the harbor. With his final orders being issued, the mission begins. Group C travels through the water and successfully boards an enemy vessel, while Group A makes it past the enemy guard post with ease, dispatching multiple guards and infiltrating HQ without raising any alarms. While this is happening, Group B has successfully planted explosives all around the enemy airfield. As the South Korean troops gather on the runway for formation, Group B sets off the explosives, destroying the South Korean aircraft stationed there and setting their troops into disarray. A huge firefight erupts as Army Group B opens fire on the unprepared South Korean troops on the airfield. Meanwhile, the Special Forces commander attempts to evacuate the HQ when he's confronted by the captain from Army Group A, who demands his immediate surrender. The commander throws a beer bottle at the captain, who immediately shoots him dead. Talk about anticlimactic. While all this is happening, Army Group C takes down an entire harbor full of Korean sailors with nothing but their bare hands. However, Chung Hyun is killed by a sailor with enough common sense to use his grease gun. We then get to see the captain with Army Group A as they make their escape from the burning base aboard a Type 85 APC that's been mocked up to look like an M113. The captain suffers a non-fatal wound from a Browning automatic rifle and observes the remaining South Koreans, including Chung Young-dar, boarding a helicopter to chase the North Koreans. Realizing the inevitable choice he must make, he volunteers to stay behind while the rest of the team escapes on a boat captured by Army Group C. The captain accepts his fate and climbs aboard the helicopter as it begins to ascend. He looks on at his comrades escaping, delivers a propaganda-filled message about fulfilling his duty to the dear leader and the Workers' Party of Korea, then detonates an explosive, killing himself and destroying the helicopter in the process. In the final scene, we're rejoined with the remainder of the group returning back to North Korean territory and regrouping with the chief. The chief asks Young-gun where Captain Chol U and the others are. Young-gun replies that they didn't make it, and hands him the intel that the captain gave his life for. Heartbroken, the chief looks upon the ragged and war-torn survivors and hugs them individually, thanking them for their sacrifice. He informs them all that Unha survived, albeit barely. He then wanders off from the group, looking over the mountainous pass, thinking of everyone who died on the mission, all 3 of them. He orders the survivors back to base, and the movie closes with cheering soldiers riding atop a column of T-62 tanks, presumably on their way to liberate the South. So, what's there to say about this one? Well, to call it a martial arts movie would be inappropriate, yet to call it a war movie would be too simplistic. I think this movie can best be summed up as, Enter the Dragon and Full Metal Jacket fucked and had a bastard communist child. I find this film struggling to forge its own identity. It's almost as though this movie either began as a martial arts movie, but then switched direction to a war drama film halfway through, or the other way around. So instead, we end up with this weird fusion of both, with both sides prying for dominance. The fight choreography, by the way, is absolutely dreadful. So many sped-up sequences, clearly missed hits, and people throwing themselves off buildings. That's not to say some of it isn't hilarious, however. I mean, just look at this. It's comedy gold. As far as acting and special effects go, this movie does seem to have high production values for North Korean standards. I know throughout the film I made jokes about using Soviet vehicles as stand-ins for American ones like the BTR-60 or the Mi-4, but I'm not criticizing them for doing it. In fact, the North Koreans are hardly the only ones guilty of doing that. Even American films use stand-ins for otherwise hard-to-come-by enemy vehicles, like in the 1965 film The Battle of the Bulge, where M47 Pattons were used to portray the Tiger II, or more famously, when Northrop F-5s were used to portray the fictional MiG-28s in the 1986 film Top Gun. This movie was made in the 80s, when CG was still in its infancy even in the West, so using stand-in vehicles was literally their only option. The acting is up to par with most North Korean films, which means decent but nothing memorable. I think the biggest problem this film, and every North Korean film suffers from, is that it doesn't give its characters enough human elements for the audience to form a bond with. When Kilnam dies, for example, I know that I'm supposed to feel bad for my Eastern Bloc brother, but considering what little development his character has, I don't feel anything. The same is true for Chang-hyun, whose name isn't even mentioned until after he's killed. In fact, though I mentioned the captain's name, Chol U, in the beginning of the video, we don't actually learn what his name is until the very last scene of the movie, and he's the main character, for Christ's sake. That's not to say all of the characters lack personality. Balaustein, fuck Unha. Jesus Christ, with the amount of names they gave her, you can name the entire fucking country. While Unha and Captain Chol U are well fleshed out as characters, the only problem is that their personalities are static, meaning they don't change throughout the duration of the film. And that, in of itself, isn't a bad thing. In fact, most characters in movies or books are static characters. But when we don't even know the names of half of the group members, it's important to make sure that the ones we do know show a little development. Now, where the story is concerned, I think it gives us a bit of insight as to how North Koreans view their southern brothers and sisters. One thing I noticed is that there's actually no mention of South Korea or the South Korean army at all. Now I know I describe them as South Koreans to narrate this video for realistic purposes, but no, seriously. Chang Yong-dar, the Special Forces commander, and all of the enemy soldiers are depicted as part of the US Army. And I think this plays on the North Korean perception that South Korea is occupied by the United States, and by extension, the South Korean army being just a puppet army of the United States. The movie tells of US troops committing atrocities and likes to portray North Korean soldiers as sympathetic to the enslaved South Koreans, even putting their whole mission in jeopardy when Kil-nam fights a US Army soldier who is strangling a South Korean child. It's the typical North Korean formula. North Koreans are seen as courageous liberators, whereas the US troops are simply heartless occupiers with no motive other than to kill. All the while, the helpless South Koreans are caught in between. Now for the story, I mentioned before about how I don't think this was meant to be a war movie at first, and the more I watch this, the more I believe that. Soldiers on both sides almost rarely use their guns, save for the climax. Literally 90% of the action in this movie is done through hand-to-hand combat, which naturally begs the question as to why they bothered to make this a war movie. Was it to show off their soldiers' taekwondo skills? Fancy kicks aren't going to save you from that soldier who can punch holes in you from 300 meters away. I'm also perplexed by the equipment used in this film. North Koreans used captured Korean War-era American weapons, the M3 submachine gun, aka the grease gun, 1911s, M1 carbines, and so do the South Koreans. Now this is historically accurate, and even still to this day, but this is set presumably in the 80s. South Koreans and their American counterparts were issued M16s by this point, with only reserves being issued older equipment. North Korea by this time also had standardized the AKM as well. So while it's understandable that they give the South Koreans US weapons, being they didn't have access to M16s, it's a wonder why they didn't use AK props for the North Korean soldiers to make them more intimidating. It could be because this film barely uses the guns it does show, and instead emphasizes Taekwondo. Then again, this could also just be me rambling about something insignificant. So, while this film fits well within the "it's so bad, it's good" category of films, it does offer us some insights as to the North Korean point of view on the conflict, or at least the government-sanctioned point of view. This film does a good job of telling the story, and the climax is actually really good. Like all films from this country, there is a heavy dose of propaganda with a central theme, with said theme being that sacrificing yourself for the dear leader and the Workers' Party of Korea is the duty of every citizen, and you must do it without question. Though, I must admit, it's hard to see how this film can be about sacrifice when the North Koreans are portrayed as practically indestructible killing machines that litter the earth with the dead bodies of those who oppose them. I mean, out of the group of about 10 people, only 3 die, and this was supposed to be a suicide mission. Hell, even Unha survived for some reason. Still, however, if you can get past the comically bad fight scenes, this movie is worth a watch for the sheer entertainment value. Just don't go in expecting to take this movie seriously, or else you'll end up for a bit of a disappointment. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.